Hello, Steve. Hello,
Hey,
Tammy.
hey, Brian and Perry, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. Doing
Good,
good.
good to see you. And Perry, thanks for joining. We were hoping you'd join.
Well, I am, but I think, I'll just visit with you a little bit and let maybe duck out. You can talk to Brian about his book, which is, the most exciting thing.
Well, I know because we also want to talk a little St. Cuthbert's Way and pilgrimage too. So we'll get some of that in as well.
We'll do that.
Sure.
Fantastic. Well, it's really good to see you again, and it's been too long, I think, but I think we've been following you on the periphery. I've done subsequently, I think, since the last talk, I've done your prayer school via online, and obviously following the release of the book, and I'm part of the Revelation class that's on.
Oh, yes. Isn't that good?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
I've made minimal contributions, but I just think it's really good.
there's so much meat there, and to be honest, because it's on at 12 midnight here at Hong Kong, I've only watched it live one time, but I'm usually catching it during my lunch break in my office the next day, or I'm trying to catch up. I'm actually a couple behind, but it's been wonderful.
Revelation is a little much after midnight, huh?
I tried it once to stay up, but I tell you, Friday morning 6 a.m. comes really quick when you do that. So before we get into the book, Brian, obviously you guys did St. Cuthbert Way, and I'm a little jealous because Hong Kong, we're landlocked here. We have some of the most stringent COVID regulations. It's almost impossible to travel. So when I'm watching friends travel and I'm following them on Caminos and things, and then watching you on St. Cuthbert, I thought, oh, we're both a little jealous. So, but I'm unfamiliar with the walk. So tell us a little bit about it.
Well, first of all, it was onerous getting there and getting back. That the COVID restriction. I mean, once we were there, it was fine. But all of the testing was difficult to do in the time frame you had to do it within. And so I mean, it was maybe a little early, but we still did it.
It was just difficult getting the right information as far as what was required. So that, I mean, as much as anything, or we say we went to Scotland as a test for international travel.
Sure.
Of course, because we wanted to, but it really was wonderful once we got there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 70-mile walk from Melrose in Scotland, along what they call the borderlands. So some of the time you're in England, some of the time you're in Scotland, some of the time you're in England, and most of the time you never know.
Yeah.
It's one or the other.
The border. Yeah. It's like when you on the Camino Francis, when you cross from France into Spain, you don't really know when you did it. You just know that you did it.
Well, we did, but it was in the middle of a pasture.
You have to know where to look.
But it was a sign. We were climbing a fence.
It's very insignificant.
Yeah. But, welcome to England.
Oh yeah.
Well, but they were talking about Spain.
Oh yes. Yeah. But so actually there's a connection to Iona. That the gospel was brought from Ireland to Iona, which is an island on the west coast of Great Britain. And then 100 years later, missionaries were sent across Britain to the other side. They wanted to send someone. His name was Aidan, Saint Aidan. Okay. And he made his ministry headquarters on another island on the opposite side of the island. And it's Lindisfarne. And it's a tidal island where you can only cross over, with the tide, a certain number of hours per day. And you have to know it changes every day. But we literally walked 2.5 miles, something like that, across on the ocean bed, on the ocean floor. Just took our shoes off and walked across.
I mean, you can't even. There is a causeway. Cars drive there, but not at high tide.
Right.
Only at low. I mean, the road itself is underwater. So, half of the time it really is even. In this time in modernity, it's still a tidal island that part of the time is connected and part of the time is
But it's a
Yeah.
metaphor for being in the world and then withdrawing from the world for a time alone with God.
Mhm.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Really, really a beautiful place. Loved it. And I really want to go back. We just weren't there long enough.
You know, I can appreciate the beauty there because, you know, just south of there, I think I've mentioned before, my first long distance walk was the Wainwright Coast to Coast, which is in North England, just south of the Scottish border. And you walk from the Irish Sea to the North Sea. And the beauty is so, it's so spectacular, the Lake District and the moors. And so I can appreciate, because I have not been to Scotland, neither have you. You haven't
No, and
been.
I'm still waitlisted for that walk as well. I want to do it.
No.
One of the differences between, I mean, there's a lot of differences, but one of the main differences between Camino de Santiago and St. Cuthbert's Way is if you're used to, you know, you've done all kinds of stuff. I get that. So you won't be a surprise to you. But if you're used to the Camino, which is very well marked,
Yeah,
St.
yeah,
Cuthbert, you can go wrong.
yeah.
And even when you're trying not to go wrong, really paying attention, you can go wrong. Our first day was supposed to be a 15-mile day, and it turned out to be a 19-mile day because
Yeah.
2 miles in the wrong direction, then finally realized it and turned back for 2 miles. And
Oh,
it's
that's
not near as well marked.
you know, Brian, I just finished, I haven't published it yet, but I finished my book on the Via Francigena, and a couple times I mentioned, particularly in France, it's that same situation where there's nothing more frustrating than finding out you just walked 2 miles in the wrong direction. It's
You just stand there a moment. I was with you the first week, and I remember that happening. You just stand there and
I struggle because it's not tongues that want to come out of my mouth.
Well, usually, like when we didn't know it. We just knew that this can't possibly be the
After
way.
you know, you start having that feeling, I don't think this is right.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the Camino, though, you can't really go wrong. I mean, you have to try to get lost or get off the route. And people will tell you, they'll say, no, this you go this way.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case. And this could be a COVID thing. We met no one that wasn't from the UK. We were the only foreigners that we ever encountered. That may be a UK, but of course, this isn't all that well known either.
Right.
So that was different too.
Right. Well, you've done the Camino Portuguese, and we were ready to walk the Camino Portuguese when COVID hit. We were booked. Yeah. We were flying to London, 3 days in London, meeting my parents, flying to Porto, and we were all set to go. And I remember up until the week before the flight, we kept saying, I think we can still do this. I think we can still do this. And, you know, obviously the world went crazy after that. Yeah. And, you know, I need to mention to you guys, we felt, we drove right past St. Joseph, Missouri about 6 months ago.
Really? Shame on you.
This is what happened. I don't know if my father passed away due to COVID. Back in March, and we couldn't travel yet, but the family gathered. Long story short was he was buried in the family cemetery just north of Des Moines, Iowa. And so we were driving up through Arkansas, through Missouri. And I actually said that
New Orleans.
We started,
in Houma.
And
a lot of driving.
Yeah. I hadn't driven in 8 years, and we ended up over 10 days driving 4,000 miles across 10 states. And but we were driving up, I think it's I-35, just east of St. Joseph. Is that it? And I said to Tammy, I said, you know, I should message Brian and Peri Zahnd. I said, it feels so weird, like having this, they've impacted our lives so much over the last few years, and we've kind of interacted at a distance. It feels weird to be driving up and not, I said, maybe we could run over and just, even if they're in the office, say, hi, this is the real people. And we,
sorry, he got vetoed. There were kids in the car, and
I understand.
We had a funeral to get to, and but you were in our thoughts for sure.
If we ever come to Hong Kong, we won't do that to you.
Don't do that. Yeah, no. We'll come find you.
Yeah, since we last talked to you, Hong Kong has changed considerably, and
I'm aware that it is changing. I mean, just by reading and paying attention and understanding.
Yeah. So for the first time, we're having thoughts of where would we go? You know,
Yeah,
so
laws are being passed, legislature itself is being changed on the way, who you can vote for and who can run. It's
And-
really becoming restrictive.
and
Well,
and tra-
it's going to be China.
yeah, it's, you know, up until a year ago, Brian and Peri, you know, I traveled to China all the time for my work before COVID. And there was very distinct. It was China and it was a Hong Kong and a border, and that arm did not reach into here. You felt very distinct. That's no longer the feeling anymore. And so,
Yeah.
but we're blessed.
I think it's just inevitable.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So
Is there an exodus going on if people can get out?
yeah. We've got both my Chinese friends and my foreign long-time Hong Kong non-Chinese friends. The stat that they're bantering around in the news is that in the last year, 90,000 people have emigrated from Hong Kong. And, you know, it's not uncommon for us to be going to a going away party. And
I assume a lot of the expats will end up being gone.
You know, part of it, Brian, is not even just the political change. It's because they're isolating themselves with COVID and the zero tolerance that we're foreseeing travel being restricted for the foreseeable future. When we came back from the States, we echo all those headaches of, I mean, I could bore you with the tension and the anxiety, but then
when we got to Japan, they held the plane and they let you know the plane is waiting and will take whoever's documents, if your test expired, you know, the length of time, anything's not correct.
Quarantine hotel
you'll be put
reservation.
back on the plane back to America.
Yeah. And
my goodness.
And we saw a few people go back the other way. We were hoping that they were just going to do something for them there, but
she spent
possibly.
3 weeks in a hotel. I spent 2 weeks in a hotel room, and we were right down the hallway from one another. And we would periodically open the door really fast, look out, wave, and then
I can't fathom that. But
yeah, it's the only reason we traveled is the passing of my father. So anyhow, I think that's as good on the pilgrimage. I guess we should move on to the book. Peri, you're welcome to stay, or
we understand.
But we understand. I know Brian has to do a ton of these, and so very appreciative.
Oh, yeah, I do a ton of them. I don't mind. I enjoy it, but it is a ton.
I'm sure.
It's only the third one today.
That's
oh wow.
I will say I love the book. I had the honor of every day when he finished writing, we would sit down and I would read it aloud to him. And so I was the first editor, got to make suggestions, some of which he took.
Sure.
But just some proofreading and things. And I think it's a really important book, and I'm absolutely thrilled. I have heard him talk about it before, though.
I'm sure you have. But before you go, though, let me just say, is one of the things I think Tammy and I are able to appreciate that most of your readers will not be able to appreciate, is when you mention places like Castro de Riz on the Camino. I know exactly where that is.
That's the town that it takes you forever to get to. You see it. You see it. Yeah.
There it is walking in. Tammy walking in, and little Ethan, bless his heart, 6 years old, walked the Camino.
That's awesome.
I look like I'm huffing and puffing.
Yeah.
Like, getting up there.
Yeah, it's and most of the lodging, or at least where we've stayed, is at the far end of the town. So you think you're there, and then you're gonna walk all the way through the town.
I know that feeling, and you just want to sit down and you just want to rest, and it's like, oh, really? We got to keep. But
it is one of our favorite towns. It's really a nice town. I like it.
Yeah, no, it's one of those towns. One of the things I remember, I don't know, Peri, if you said it in a previous conversation or I read it in your book, but so many people talk about not doing the Meseta, or jumping from the Pyrenees and from Palermo, Pamplona. That's what I meant to say. Over to Galicia. Yeah, and the Meseta, I find, is one of the most beautiful sections. And I know you've commented on the same thing.
Yeah, I could not have imagined skipping it. It would just be a very sad thing to have missed the Meseta.
Yeah, just seeing that open road and approaching those villages like that, it's hardly an experience to be replicated because it's so part of that Camino experience. So when people tell me, "Oh no, we skipped the Meseta," I'm thinking, "Oh,
I mean, I don't try to shame them, but on the inside, I'm like, oh man, that's wrong."
yeah.
Well,
I hear you.
The Meseta is life.
Yeah.
I mean, I always think of the Camino in three distinct phases, and the Meseta is the middle one, and it's your middle years, it's adulthood, it's putting one foot in front of the other, it's grinding it out, it's raising your kids, it's wondering.
But it has its own beauty too.
Yes, but it's beautiful, and you think, what if we'd missed all this? What if we missed all this?
Brian, quite a while ago, you did a teaching, and I have actually reused parts of this. I've shared this with people. You talked about Jesus's life after year 12 in the temple when Mary and Joseph searching for him, and how rather than going on because he has this great anointing, he goes back to Nazareth. And you use this term sanctifying the mundane. And and to me, the Meseta is that typifies for me, that's the metaphor of sanctifying the mundane, because you can either look at it as mundane and boring, or as mundane and something beautiful and something to be experienced. And it just depends on what your state of your heart is.
So. I agree.
Practically that stretch physically broke my body in. And by the time I completed that, I wanted to restart the Camino from the first day and do it all again, because I felt like I can appreciate it so much more now. Like I felt like I caught the rhythm.
Route, it's a cruel start. I mean, it's beautiful. But if you do the first day, if you do Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Roncesvalles, even if you're in good shape, that is a hard day.
Yes. So one of our best Camino secrets is Junto. Do you know about Junto?
Which is Junto?
Junto was a town that's just a little bit up the mountain.
It's 6 kilometers up from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port.
And so both times, what we have done is we arrive in Saint-Jean. We don't spend a night there or anything, and we walk to Junto. And it just takes, what would it be? It takes 3.2 miles off of
it's very steep
off of that next day. It's you know how steep it is, but it just short that day.
It's interesting. I don't remember the name, but now that you mention it, I remember passing an albergue not long after that, thinking, this would be a nice break if you wanted to break up in, and if Orison is filled, a lot of people break it up by going to Orison.
This is before Orison, and I recommend it.
Yeah.
For anybody that's, now it's like Orison. You have to get Well, the first time we just lucked onto it. We just heard that it was available and booked something. But then when we did it the second time, we planned on it, and we'll probably always do it that way.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, we won't be able to sway you then from now that I've done it twice. Like I have to say at Bellari Albergue in St. Jean, because for me they give the proper pilgrim send off, and I swear by it. But everybody has their thing, and
I could see that too.
We've
we don't really know Saint Jean very well. We're like there and gone.
Yeah. Well, we so appreciate your time. So we should probably move on to the book, but it's been great. The podcast is celebrating life and faith through the lens of pilgrimage. So we have to check that box.
Yeah. I might pop back in before you're finished.
Sure, Peri. Thanks so much. It was great. Great seeing you. Well, Brian, when everything's on fire, why this book and why now?
Well, we're still stuck on the Camino because that's where the book was conceived. The prelude, I talk about how, one of the things the Camino is a time machine. You can actually get a sense of a different epoch. You can sense 800 years ago. And because you're passing so many ancient churches, and we try to visit as many as we can. And so you become aware of a time that I don't want to be overly romantic about it, because I'm not, but at least you are aware of a time when faith and God was at the center of society. Maybe, infected with a certain amount of superstition and everything else that may have gone with that, but still, faith was at the center. And you realize, oh, we live in a different age. That is not the case. And we're living at a time that was foreseen and foretold as clearly by Friedrich Nietzsche as anyone. I've studied a lot of Nietzsche. I'm very able to speak at length on the works of Nietzsche. I think he's important. He was a critic. He was you know what he was, Steve? He was a PK.
Yeah.
And PK has gone bad, man. That's that's its own tale right there.
I've seen that before.
But Nietzsche, who I like him, and if for no other reason, he's just such a good writer. I think he gets some things terribly wrong, but he does foresee what is coming, what is looming on the horizon. And now what he foretold and foresaw is here in full force. And that is a secular age. And so as I was walking the Camino, I'm just thinking, well, if I could talk to someone that is feeling like their faith is being imperiled, that the faith they had as a child or earlier in life is now threatened in some way, what would I say to them? And I was having these thoughts for a week or more. It was part of what I was just thinking about as we walked. And it was at Castro Harris where I finally sat there one day, after the long walk, and sitting there with, probably a glass of wine and a plate of cheese. And I have my little notebook. And I just wrote at the top, when everything's on fire. When everything's on fire. I'll tell you where I got that title. I stole the title, sort of. There is a very obscure novel by a Portuguese author, Antonio Lobo Antunes, who I've read a lot of his work. And he has one of his novels entitled, What Can I Do When Everything's on Fire? And it has nothing to do with anything remotely like my book. It's a very difficult book. It's a stream of consciousness novel that's verges on inscrutable. So I'm not recommending anybody read it, but the title came to me, and I said, it feels like everything's on fire. And so I wrote When Everything's on Fire, and I created an outline of these 11 chapters that I really, sometimes I write a book and I have an idea and it meanders off in a completely different direction. This was not the case with this book. It seemed the inspiration came pretty quick on that one day. Castro Harris, which is about, I think it's like 200 miles into it. And so that's where it was conceived. That would be in October of 2019. I didn't really get to work on the book until January. So I have this book title, When Everything's on Fire. I'm beginning it, and then everything was on fire. I thought everything was on fire, and then everything was on fire. So where does it come from? It comes from a pastoral heart. We're living in a time where the word deconstruction is suddenly very much in vogue. I have my own story, I know you do too, of going through a critical rethinking of faith. For me, it began really in earnest in about 2004, and it was a journey of 3 or 4 years. I would never have used the word deconstruction. I didn't think of it like that. That wasn't the term that was in vogue at that time. It's a word, or it comes to us from the French philosopher Jacques Derrida, who is the founder of deconstruction theory, and he applies it to texts and how texts never have a complete finished meaning, according to Derrida, and that texts often have a hidden agenda lurking behind them, and the attempt then is to deconstruct the text to find what is lurking behind the text. Maybe it's a bid for power or something like that. I don't know that that's really as applicable as people might think it is to what is the phenomenon today of people just arriving at a moment where at least some aspect of their Christian faith is no longer tenable. And so what do? Do you just throw it all away? Or is there a way to navigate this time and actually arrive at a better faith? But we're also living through a time where people, maybe of great note, are publicly losing their faith. And so I wanted to step into the conversation and hopefully in a helpful way assist people in maintaining their faith during a time of crisis and doubt and rethinking and that sort of thing. So that's what the book is about. That's where it came from. And, it was born on, or at least conceived. Let's say it was conceived on the Camino. It was born many, many months later, but that's where it was conceived.
No, Brian, I so appreciate that. And Tammy, she's on her own journey and we often compare notes, but I know for me, I know you don't like to use the term deconstruction and prefer the term renovation. And that would have been more of my story as well, because I don't have any great pain or hurt or incident or anything, or this crisis of faith. It was more of, I think you kind of said it, the Christ that I was serving needed a better house to live in. And I think that's why, and I've said this to you before, your book, Beauty Will Save the World, was really, I know you often say that Dallas Willard's Divine Conspiracy was kind of the thing that really triggered something for you. And I'll be always eternally grateful to Beauty Will Save the World, because it really, for me, it was what the Holy Spirit needed me to read at that moment. So it was beauty that really was part of my renovation. But that leads me to my next question.
It anchored you, right?
It anchored me, and it brought color back into my faith. And so my next question is, you ground people's receptiveness to Christianity on the beauty of Christ. What do you mean by the beauty of Christ, and why hasn't much of the church in America particularly focused on that in the last few decades?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for that comment about Beauty Will Save the World. And just coincidentally, a podcast I did earlier today, the host said almost verbatim what you just said. He said, Beauty Will Save the World is the most influential book in my life in the last 10 years. So it's nice to hear some.
I echo that. I have two copies. I have 2 copies of it in my office to give to the right people at the right moment.
Well, giving the right book to the right person that can really be a life-changing thing. All right. So, but the question is, well, America is cursed with pragmatism. America is utilitarian and pragmatic. And it's always been a challenge for a church hosted by a superpower or by an empire, whatever word you want to use, that the values of the empire or the superpower often shade and influence the formation of Christian theology of the church that's being hosted by that. And the church then in the empire often has an outside influence on the rest of the world. And America is very practical, pragmatic, utilitarian, and we've picked that up, and it is no friend to beauty. Now, what we've seen in the last, I don't know how many years you want to say, I don't know, pick a date, 10 years, 12 years, 5 years, I don't know, but we've seen a very ugly turn. I mean, there's always been a problem within the evangelical church in America of trying to conflate a particular political agenda with the kingdom of Christ. And I have written critically of it for quite some time now, but now it is becoming absolutely alarming. And I think we're living through a time where much of the American church is just being seduced by the lure of political power, because we have in our head that we are supposed to change the world. And that is not our task. Christ is the Savior of the world. And if the world is to be saved, Christ and Christ alone will do that. The task of the church is simply to be the world as already in the process of being saved and transformed by Christ. Stanley Hauerwas says that the primary task of the church is to make the world, which means the primary task of the church is to be something other than the world. When the church, though, contends for the coercive power of Caesar's sword, it's just the church becoming the world. Here's the thing. You have Nietzsche, or you have Voltaire, or you have the modern critics of, let's say, Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris and Dennett and people like that, who launch very vitriolic attacks upon Christianity. I get it. That's not hard to do. I can in some ways appreciate that to a certain extent. In the book, I talk about how that Soren Kierkegaard, who was a believing Christian, could be just as polemic in his assault upon the state-sponsored Christianity of Northern Europe as Nietzsche was, right?
Sure.
But here's the thing: no one really launches a sustained attack upon Christ.
Mhm.
The few that have tried it, it's just a bad look, and they can't seem to sustain it. Nietzsche, in fact, tried a little bit. He tried to just directly attack Jesus and then stopped. I can't do that.
Yeah.
And he kind of admits a begrudging admiration for Jesus. And as Christians, we confess that Jesus is the judge of the world, that Christ shall come to judge the world. Well, Christ already judges the world.
Yeah.
And essentially everybody knows it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
everyone's and I don't just mean believers. I mean, everybody kind of knows that the perfect life is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
The perfect one, the sinless one is Jesus. And his life already is the standard, the rule, the judge, if you will.
That's been my experience too, whether it's a celebrity, maybe secular atheist, like even a Bill Maher. I'll see Bill Maher criticize Christianity, but he'll speak positively of Jesus. I've got friends here that very, very high profile people who don't believe in God. But I said to one not too long ago, I said, I said this guy's name, and I just said, I know you. You want a world that's more fair, equitable, just, righteous. I said, if Jesus was walking around Hong Kong doing what he did 2,000 years ago, you'd be following him. And he literally was struck for a second. He thought for a second, and he goes, right, Steve, I probably would. He said, I wouldn't believe he's the son of God, but I'd probably follow him. I said, that's all he's ever asked, is for people to follow him. So
Rene Girard said something very interesting. Maybe this is in line a little bit what we're talking about. I probably, or I don't know if I would have had it in the book. I've read a lot of Girard, but I didn't read this until the book was already finished. It's one of the great pithy quotes from Girard. And he says, Voltaire and his successors only criticize Christianity with Christianity. What Girard's insight there is that the critique leveled at Christianity by its critics is they are drawing upon a moral and ethical foundation that is the bequest of Christianity to the Western world. And so in essence, the harshest critics of the church and Christianity is that we are not Christian enough, to which I just want to go, okay, pray for us.
Yeah.
You're right.
You're right. I think I'm trying to think if you mentioned it in the book, Brian, but I know your experience and my experience too on my pilgrimages, and even when I was in France in the Via Francigena, is I run into secular people who, because they've been submerged in this ethos of Christianity, even if they no longer believe in God, often they tend to be more Christ-like. My experience is often they're more Christ-like in their fruit than many of my American Christian friends that are posting things on Facebook that make me cringe.
I completely resonate with that. I get it. I understand it. Yeah. And what do you say to that? I don't know what to say other than, when I talk about beauty that will save the world, it is the beauty of Christ.
Yeah.
And I just continue to talk about Jesus, emphasize the Gospels, and let Jesus himself win the day.
Yeah.
Let the beauty of Christ triumph over every other argument and kind of resistance. I mean, it is not a time for we Christians to be overly confident or assertive. Look, I mean, this is drawn more from Beauty Will Save the World, but the Greek philosophers talked about the transcendentals, the true, the good, and the beautiful. And they're called the transcendentals because They don't need to be supported by any other value. They don't. I mean, what I mean by that is we want the true why because it's true. We want the good why because it's good. We want the beautiful why because it's beautiful. It doesn't have to serve any other end. It doesn't have to justify its worth other than being what it is, the true, the good, and the beautiful. Later, the church fathers will say, yes, indeed. And the transcendentals are attributes of the divine, attributes of God. God is the true, the good, and the beautiful. Now, the church has known this. And over our long 2,000-year history, we have a long, we have a vast reservoir of Christian apologetics, that is the defense of the truth claims of the Christian faith. And we have a vast reservoir of Christian ethics, that is trying to define the good in the light of Christ. But when it comes to Christian aesthetics, the church has been hit and miss. Sometimes we lean into that. Other times, we're more influenced by a wider secular culture that viewed it as mere prettification or adornment. Well, here's our present moment right now for Christians in this moment. We live at a time when the wider society is deeply suspicious of any claim to absolute truth or a superior moral ethic. And especially if it comes from Christians, and perhaps for very good reasons. In other words, if we position ourselves in the marketplace of ideas today saying, we have absolute truth and we know what is good for you, and we meet at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings, that may not be very persuasive.
Yeah, we know how that goes over.
But beauty's different. Gail Cervantes says, it is the charm and prerogative of beauty to win hearts. Beauty has a way of sneaking past our defenses. Of course, this is part of the story I tell in the book about on the day that Derrida died, and the young man who I think was probably from Singapore on the train in Paris, and who had left his faith. He had just graduated from college. I tell the story, and
it was a beautiful story.
It was going to Notre Dame just to see the architecture. He wasn't going there out of any spiritual or religious impulse. Just wanted, the historic value of the beauty of the building. But walking into that cathedral, he suddenly, just the beauty itself alerted him to what he had pushed out of his mind, that God is there and God is real. And he tried to pray, and then we met on the train, and the stories in the book. But that was a case of, well, I'll tell you this much. If I had somehow known the state of, his name was you, which makes the telling of the story interesting. If I'd known the story of you on the train in Paris on the day that Derrida died, and had tried to persuade him to return to his Christian faith through clever apologetics or something like that, I can tell you he would be well armed to defend all of that and to brush all of that aside. But it was beauty that snuck past all of that and captured his heart again, and gave a new opening for Christ to win his heart. So,
Brian, as you share that, let me bring Tammy in on this, because about maybe a week or two ago, she messaged me and said, I'm reading Brian's book. And I think she was in that part.
I'm like, I'm crying.
So I asked her to share.
No, I think just going back a little, in chapter 3, you were talking about how we can approach when we get to this point in our faith where we realize it doesn't all add up anymore. It's not as sure a foundation as I thought I had, with, the scaffolding needs to come up and look at it as a restoration of art. And to me, that was so gripping and compelling to keep reading, because I think I had definitely been going at it with a sledgehammer. And the gentleness of that approach, it just really spoke to me and awakened something inside. And then you doubled up with Notre Dame. And when I've been to Paris, I think I've gone twice and sat there, on a trip, because it's just so compelling to get back over to that area and even sit outside and look in, or, just being in that vicinity. And
when you talk about the fire, you talk about the fire and how
the story with you on the train in Paris on the day that Derrida died, that happened in October of 2004, so quite a long time ago. And I've told that story all these years. but then it was April 15th, 2019. It was Monday of Holy Week. And at Word of Life now, we really lean strong into the Christian calendar, and Holy Week, we're just, we're just church all week long. If you can be there, something's going on. And so we have many services throughout the week on Holy Week. And there was a noon prayer service, and I was conducting that in our prayer chapel, the upper room. And I got done with the service. And, you get the notifications on your phone. And I just, Notre Dame is on fire. I love this place. I mean, when I'm in Paris, if I can, I will go there every day. That's how much I love that place. And I mean, I'm getting teary-eyed just now, and I've told the story so many times, but that just shocked me. And I came home, turned on the television, and I think not since 9/11 had I just been frozen in front of a television screen for hours on end. And I couldn't stop the tears from coming. And I wasn't the only one that felt that way. I mean, Paris could be in many, it's a beautiful city, but in many ways it would be probably the epicenter of Western secularism. And just, the average Parisian walking past Notre Dame day after day with shoulder shrugging indifference is kind of a real picture of the time in which we live. And yet, I mean, they can ignore Notre Dame as long as it's just there. But when it's on fire and people realize, this could be lost, they weren't shouting, burn it all down, hashtag empty the pews, ex-evangelical or whatever. It was rather they were weeping. And some who hadn't prayed for who knows how long are praying some prayers or singing some hymns. And I found that very moving. And so you play with that a little bit. And it's not Notre Dame, let's say it in English, it's Our Lady. When Our Lady's on fire, I mean, we understand that Our Lady can be unfaithful and Our Lady can not live up to her high calling. We understand all of that. And we acknowledge it and we don't try to hide it. But when Our Lady is on fire and could be lost, I think most people realize that even though they can be critical of the church, and I hasten to add, Voltaire and his critics only criticized Christianity with Christianity. The idea that there would no longer be present in the world that which keeps alive the story of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, the story of Jesus forgiving sinners and healing the sick. I don't think there are many people that seriously think the world would be better off without that. And so sometimes people aren't as done as they think they are. They think they're done as long as if I ever do want to return, it'll be there. So I'm playing with metaphor here, but Notre Dame on fire, it alerted people to the fact that this could be lost. And, and so I've been very fascinated on this story. And so I've read everything I can find on it. And the truth is that Notre Dame came within maybe 30 minutes of being lost. It was only after there was a fire, a team, I guess, crew team that were tasked with taking hoses up these two towers, the bell towers, and they declined because of the danger. But another team volunteered and said, "We'll do it." And they fully knew they were risking their lives. They did it, and only because they did that was Notre Dame saved. Well, again, I'm playing around with metaphor here, but I mean, not to overstate it, not to sound, overly heroic or anything, but I want to be a part of that team that says, I'll carry the fire hoses up the bell tower. Because I think this is worth saving.
As you say that, it's kind of almost my closing question is how do we, how did that, I don't want to close because it sounds like a closing question, and it is a closing question, but it's along those lines of, because I wanted to ask what's next for Brian and Peri. Your platform, from my viewpoint, obviously your platform and visibility has grown, and you're having a greater impact. That fire hose that you mentioned, it has a greater capacity. What do you see you guys doing besides pastoring Word of Life? Because as you share that, Brian, I get very excited, because I want to be I think Tammy and I want to be part of that team that's trying to save it. Let me preface that I butted heads with a longtime pastor friend of mine here in Hong Kong not too long ago. And I said to him, I said his name, and I said, I think one of the things that we're butting heads on is you spend a lot of time at the front of the church trying to get people to accept Jesus as their personal Lord and Savior and bring them in the front door. I said, I'm spending a lot of time these days at the back door of the church trying to keep people from losing their faith. And I think that's where we're butting heads. And so as you share that, I see I see a lot of them not really seeing Notre Dame metaphorically on fire, but I see it on fire. And that's why you've been such a
and you felt alone here because of that.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. That's it. Is Hong Kong, we feel very alone. And I think that's why I reach out to guys like you, why I attend prayer school via Zoom, why I join the Revelation group, why we even run this podcast. Is a lot of this kind of discussion is not happening in Hong Kong. They're in a different season on the journey in Hong Kong. The church is in a different place.
Well, I can't comment on Hong Kong. I have no idea what like that, but I know about North America.
Yeah,
and if I could, I just wish I could get the church to leave the field of the culture wars. Just leave it. Yeah. Just leave it. It's ruining everything.
It's burning it all down.
The church. Let's take just in terms of the Sunday gathering. The Sunday gathering should not be a battlefield. It's a shelter from the storm. It's a respite from that. It is a place of peace. I mean, if Sunday morning just remains another place to advance your culture war cause, and you just bring more of the same vitriol and anger into the pulpit that you hear on cable news and the internet and everywhere else. I mean, eventually people are going to say, I've got better things to do with my Sunday morning than that. Yeah. So the church needs to truly be something other. That's why I said earlier in our conversation, I said, we just need to let go of the folly of trying to change the world. That's not our task. It's just not our task. Our task is to simply be that part of the world as already in the process of being changed and transformed by Christ. So I would like for the church to be much more modest, quiet, not pursuing some sort of grand cause, but simply leaning more into being contemplative. The Spirit, I think maybe the best thing I do as a pastor anyway, pastorally, is to teach people how to pray. And that's the prayer schools. And it's one of those things that I never set out to do. I didn't sit around one day and go, maybe I should have a course on prayer. Well, what would I want to say about that? No, it came organically out of my own life. This is how I, in midlife, learned how to pray. And people began to ask me, will you teach me what you do in prayer? And it's continued up to this day. So if we have to try to wrestle people to the ground and convince them that we know what's good for them, that's probably not going to work, not anymore. If we could be formed in Christ to such an extent that somebody might say, teach me what you know, because I see it in your life in the form of peace and wisdom, kindness. I want some of that. Teach me what you know. That's when the church will again have currency and relevance and something to say. But if we feel like we have to fight and then use the apparatus of government to try to win our battles, for crying out loud, that is what a catastrophe. That in fact, not to overstate it, that is to fail in the third temptation and to bow to the devil.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what that is.
Yeah. You know, being back in the States over the summer, Tammy and I, you know, for the first time, like I mentioned, we're thinking, if we're to leave Hong Kong in the future, where would we go? And I got to admit, up until recently, I've watched America and I thought, no, I don't want to get involved in that. It's just too, and I'm seeing you guys in Missouri. I mean, I can only imagine what it must be like in a red state trying to bring this message. And I'm thinking, oh, Tam, do we do that? And half of us wants to just get a place in Portugal and enjoy a quiet life.
You have no idea how often we fantasize about that.
Yeah, maybe we'll all be in the same place because we're having very serious conversations.
It is top on our list right now.
It is very much so. But
there's a language barrier.
Yes. You know, I'm very looking at the time. I want to be sensitive. Obviously, there's a number of questions here, but we'll save it for ongoing discussions. But you bring up one of the things you do well, Brian, is teaching of prayer and the contemplative life. One thing I want to raise from the book is you talk about Karl Rahner saying, you know, in the future, Christians will be mystics or there'll be nothing. And there's such especially from the traditions we come from, that word mystic throws people off a little bit. And another thing I appreciate about you and Peri is you both come from the charismatic movement as well, as do we. And so we've always trying to wrestle that how much do we keep and how much do we jettison? That's a whole nother discussion. And so I guess I'm trying to form this into a question because it also goes into that second naivety too, of how do we recapture that second innocence. So in closing, could you encapsulate on the idea of what does mysticism look like going forward? And for some of us like myself who have struggled with the pendulum of cynicism, recapturing, you know, I think Tammy and I and a number of us that have renovated, we've been able to peek behind the curtain of the church and realizing that much of what we thought was Oz was really some guy just, you know, moving the levers. And I don't want to be cynical. I know Tammy doesn't want to be cynical. And to a degree, we have recaptured some of that innocence. But for listeners out there, what steps or what have you found useful?
Yeah, let me just talk first about mysticism. I understand that some are conditioned to be alarmed at such a word as if it's somehow New Age occultism or something. No, a mystic is someone, it's simply someone who seeks and at some level attains an experience within the mystery of God. And this is what Scripture sets forth as completely normative. I mean, whether we're talking about Abraham hearing the voice of God or Moses at the burning bush or all the way through both testaments, the idea that people can encounter God in their own experience is set forth as part of what is normal for a human being. Birds can fly, fish can swim, and human beings are designed to experience God. Karl Rahner, we mentioned him. German Catholic theologian who in 1971 said, the Christian of the future will be a mystic, that is someone who has experienced something, or they will cease to be anything at all. I think that was a very prescient remark. And what Karl Rahner called the future 50 years ago in 1971 is today. We live in what Karl Rahner called the future, we call it today. And we've reached the point where Christian faith will probably not be sustained by an intellectual argument or some allegiance to a tradition. It's going to have to be sustained by an experience. The good news is that you are designed to experience God. Again, I can't do the whole book here in the last few moments, but since the Enlightenment, through empiricism, which isn't all bad, it has many, many, many upsides to it. But unfortunately, what it's done for too many Christians is kick them up inside their head. And we're all alone upstairs inside of our head, trying to be the sole arbiter of truth based on if it can be proved empirically. What we need to do is come down into the hearth room, into the heart. You know, as Blaise Pascal, intellectual equal and contemporary of Rene Descartes, who says, the heart has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing. Now, I understand that here in late modernity, the era of empiricism, we've been conditioned to say that if you can't empirically prove it, it's invalid. I'm here to tell you, nonsense. The heart is where we experience such things as love. It's where we encounter God. It's where faith, hope, and love can thrive. And so I'm not telling people or urging people to chase after some sensational mystical experience. I'm saying, learn to settle down into your heart. The questions and the doubts and the fears that you have, sit with Jesus, speak of them to Jesus, and then wait and sit quietly and see what might happen, what might be said, what kind of healing or presence might come to your soul. Actually, the church has a very wonderful and long and storied history in helping people in contemplative practices to, in their own life, experience God. Much of that never reached America, by the way.
No.
A lot of that never got on the Mayflower or whatever. It missed the boat. And so America, in its great drive towards pragmatism, has not flourished in the contemplative practices, but there are those that do know.
Sure.
And it's really true. Seek and you shall find. If you want to find some people out there who understand this long history, this is not something that was just, cooked up, a couple of years ago.
Right.
We're talking about, for millennia, the church has understood how to cultivate the heart in such a way as to experience God. And that wisdom can be passed on. And I think that's where the future hope of the church lies.
Wow. Amen. That's good. I think we're going to leave it there. It's really good. I mean, I could go on. I've got like 6 or 7 other. I just would bore you to death. But
I give long answers to short questions.
No, and it's wonderful. I should, speaking on the contemplative, since we last spoke, I remember your first Water to Wine. You made available on audio, and I was listening to it while I was descending from St. Bernard Pass in the Alps into Italy. And I still remember you saying, some of you in this room are going to be finding yourself migrating in the next few months and years into the Orthodox Church, Anglican Church, Catholic Church. And I remember thinking, okay, maybe, I processed that. I need to tell you guys, I joined the Anglican Church in the last year.
Somehow I knew that. I mean, maybe you said something somewhere, but I was aware of that.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
And of course, my quip to Peri is we're all going to be Anglican eventually.
That's
or Orthodox. I'm not sure which.
And we're happy for you.
Thanks. I have a soft spot in my heart for N.T. Wright, and
who doesn't?
But I just found myself increasingly going. Tammy yet has not come over to the One True Faith. She wanted to. She said she wanted to make sure she goes to the same heaven I do.
I'm like, I kind of need to do this so we go to the same heaven.
Be a vagabond hobo with me, because that's I don't feel that liberty to just join anything. But whenever I hear, seriously, I mean this sincerely.
Sure.
Every time I hear of somebody from some evangelical or charismatic background becoming Orthodox or Catholic or Anglican, I just always rejoice. I just somehow know that that's a good thing for them. That doesn't mean that that's going to solve everybody's problem, that everybody should do that.
No.
But for those that do, I know it's meaningful and significant, and I rejoice in it.
And I know sharing that, I appreciate that. I know for me, it just became time. I was going there more and more frequently. I finally met with one of the priests. I had a wonderful discussion with him, and subsequently we've chatted over a number of things. But I remember just before I got confirmed, I was in the service and I thought, Lord, I actually said, Lord, I don't agree with everything here. And literally, I'm talking about those experiences with God. I almost audibly heard in my ear, Steve, do you really think I agreed with everything in Near East, first century Judaism? But I became a rabbi. And I thought, oh, that's a good point, Lord. Okay.
That's
so
good.
yeah.
Good. I assume that the Anglican have a very strong presence in Hong Kong. Just
Very
because of-
much so. Historical fact, the cathedral where I attend, it's the only piece of land in the entire territory of Hong Kong that is not owned by the government.
Really?
They have freehold from they're the first ones, they pretty much landed right after colonialism got here. And it's a beautiful
Colonialism
church.
is a mixed bag. There's a lot to be critiqued, but also sometimes they accidentally bring some treasures with them. Right?
There's a lot of bones, but there's a few meat. There's some meat
Yeah.
in there for you. So yeah, it's been good.
I'll just throw in something about the idea of being a mystic.
Mhm.
I love the fact that I spent so many years in a charismatic church. There are wonderful gifts there. And I think the biggest is just the idea of we are meant to encounter God.
Mhm.
And prayer school has become an incredible vehicle for teaching people, helping people to begin to enter into a life of contemplative practices. But you made a comment I heard earlier while I was off screen. I heard you say, Steve, you talked about the people that you met on the Camino who were walking the Camino and demonstrating Christ-likeness, even though they didn't claim to be followers of Christ. And, we've wondered about the same thing too. But it occurred to me that pilgrimage is a Christian formational practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And maybe orthopraxy is something that we have so overlooked, and that people who are engaging in these spiritual practices experience transformation, whether or not they claim to believe.
Yeah.
And perhaps that is their way in, their way back, their way to God. And the orthodoxy might come later.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah. No, I concur 100%, Peri. I remember one Spanish pilgrim in particular, him and his wife telling me that I did a 40-kilometer day one day, and
That's too many.
I know,
That's
with my bad hip, I can't do it anymore. But him telling me when I was sharing a little bit of why I was on the pilgrimage, he said this, Peri. He said, I don't believe in God. I've never believed in God. But he said, walking this pilgrimage, I'm not saying I believe in God now, but there's something here and I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah.
We heard that over.
I've heard that so
over.
many times. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, I hope we'll meet up again one of these days real soon. If not in Hong Kong, if not in Missouri, let it be Portugal.
Absolutely. We are going to continue to stay in touch with you too. We so appreciate everything you do. And we do look forward to that day when we see you face to face.
Yes. Amen.
So we always sign off every podcast with the pilgrimage Camino salutation. So Brian and Peri.
Buen Camino.
Buen Camino. Wait, I forgot. I was going to show you my 55th birthday present from Tammy.
Oh,
That's my
shell, the scallop shell.
Yeah.
Peri has one very similar to that.
Yeah.
She didn't have it on, but she has one very similar to that.
No, actually, I'm wearing a cross that I bought in Scotland, and of course, it's a Celtic.
Nice.
That's
Very
nice.
We're
nice.
just a bunch of pilgrims. That's all we are.
That's another excuse to call you guys, because we get to talk pilgrimage. Not everybody likes to talk this stuff.
Well, see, pilgrimage comes up on every podcast I do, and it annoys them.
Yeah.
But with you guys like it.
Yeah.
You have to do it.
Everything is kind of we center the whole podcast on it. So anyhow, thanks again so much for your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Bless you guys.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.